Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Yancey Community Room in the Mattapan Library. My name is Tim McCarthy. I'm the District 5 City Councilor. I'm also the chair of the Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice. I'm joined by my colleagues, President of the City Council, Andrea Campbell, as well as Councilor Althea Garrison. I want to remind you that this is a public hearing. It's being recorded and will be rebroadcast on Comcast 8, RCN 82, and Verizon 1964, and it's also being viewed online at boston.gov. Please silence your cell phones and all your other devices. I see people reaching for their pockets. That's solid. I'm glad people are listening. We'll also take public testimony, and we'd appreciate if you sign. There's a to testify sheet on the outside. If you sign and check that box, you'll be called in order of your arrival. When you do come to testify, please state your name, your affiliation. We're going to keep a hard 2-minute stop on comments. 2 minutes go fairly quickly. I've already probably spoken for 2 minutes. So we're going to keep a hard 2-minute stop. There is a class that happens in this library, in this very room, at 6 o'clock, 6:15. So it's going to be a 5:45 hard stop for the meeting. So with all due respect to everybody's time and everybody in the room who has something to say about what we're dealing with in the city, if we could just make sure that everybody keeps it to 2 minutes. You'll hear my, I'll have my stop clock going, so you'll hear that. Today's hearing is docket number 0781. It's an order for a hearing to review all the grants and the city funds available for violence prevention and intervention purposes. We have two panels. We have an administrative panel, which is representatives from the city, and we also have a grantees panel of our dear CBO directors and organizers who are instrumental in helping us keep the city as safe as we all wish to and as safe as we can. So I will, quick for opening statements, introduce City Council President Andrea Campbell.
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy, and also thank you to my team. It doesn't, do this work alone. It takes a lot to organize a hearing like this, to do the outreach, to get this level of turnout. So thank you to my team. Thank you also to the Mattapan Library for hosting us. They set these chairs up. We do not. We just show up and sit down. So thank you very much. And of course, thank you to all of the folks who are here. I must say, it warms my heart to see the diversity in demographics from some of the elders that live in my district who are sitting front and center, and then to look to the left and see young people as well is quite remarkable. So thank you all for being here. I called for this hearing in the spring after several people were shot and killed in my district, including Mr. Kendrick Price, as well as Miss Eleanor Maloney, of course, the grandmother who was 74 years old. And since then, there have been several days and weeks where we've seen an uptick in violence that show the urgency of holding this hearing. And most recently, this past weekend, where several people were shot and killed in Dorchester and Mattapan. And then, of course, the deadly mass shootings that took place across this country. Homicides, we all know, are down, and we, obviously we want to commend that work of BPD, but we know that shootings are up citywide. And after any such incident, I think it's important that we ask ourselves, what are we doing about it? So one way to respond is to ensure that we have adequate city resources going towards violence prevention as well as intervention. We currently get millions of dollars, let me say that again, millions of dollars in the city of Boston, both through our own City of Boston budget as well as state resources to address incidents of violence, namely violence prevention and intervention. Some of these come in the form of SSYI funding and Shanning funding from the state, as well as the most recently established Youth Development Fund, which I pushed for in my first term in partnership with Mayor Marty Walsh. We know city investments are a demonstration of our values, and so they are absolutely necessary in the work of violence prevention and intervention. But since they are public dollars, these investments require a level of accountability. There's a real urgency in us getting this right. Last year, we invested in over 40 organizations who we expect to have an impact in preventing violence, especially among our young people. But what is the impact we expect? How do we define it? Is there a clear definition of what the objective of these funds should be used for? Some of the questions I intend to get at during this hearing is not only who receives the money, how much money are we talking about specifically, what do the organizations that receive the money do with those resources to actually prevent violence, For the initiatives run by the City of Boston ourselves, what do we do specifically to prevent violence? What do we expect from organizations in terms of actual outcomes? How do we define those outcomes? What metrics, data metrics in particular, do we use for those outcomes? And for those organizations and grantees who receive the money, are they actually meeting the metrics that we put forth? My hope is that we get to a common understanding, or at least a practice, for how we measure our impact so that we can be sure we're using our limited public dollars most effectively. I, of course, always want to acknowledge the incredible hard work of the city employees. Most of the time I say they are overworked and underpaid. That of course includes not only BPD and law enforcement, but also many folks from the Health Commission, folks out of the Mayor's Office of Public Safety, folks in various departments who touch violence prevention, intervention work, as well as reentry. And lastly, I want to thank those folks who sent us emails and questions in advance. The questions I received from community, from organizations, I forwarded to the administration so that they could have those questions beforehand. Some of the questions were my own, so that when they get up here, they would have a sense of what those questions were, of course, would not be surprised, but most importantly, would have some information and documents for us, and not simply say, I'll get back to you on that. So my hope is that we really get into a deep discussion, and this will not be the first and the last. This will have to be a series of conversations and meetings and hearings over a course of time to really get this right. So thank you again to all those that do the tough work behind the scenes that often don't get the recognition you deserve. I appreciate you. And the only way we're successful in addressing urban violence, but particularly violence in our city, is to work collectively and collaboratively. And clearly, by folks showing up today demonstrates we're all capable of that. So thank you guys again. Thank you, Councilor McCarthy, and thank you, Councilor Garrison, for being here.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Councilor Garrison.
Thank you, Chairman McCarthy and Council President Campbell and this community for being here. I'm here today to see what I can do as an at-large city council to help this community and to listen to this community as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll call the first panel, which is the administrative panel. I saw Chief Marty Martinez come in. Chief Martinez is the Chief of Health and Human Services for the city. I saw Rufus in here, Rufus Falk. He's the co-director of the Mayor's Office of Public Safety. Tracy Lifcutt, I didn't see Tracy. Tracy, he's not here yet? Yeah, there's traffic out there. That's a whole nother hearing. Maria Cheevers, Director of Research and Development for the Boston Police. I saw Maria here. And Roy Martin, Director of SSYI Services, the Boston Public Health Commission. What's up?
Okay.
I want to welcome the first panel. The people that I just called off, it's an incredible group over there. They work awfully hard to make sure that the money is spent well, and we certainly appreciate it. I know I speak for the rest of the City Council and its members that we appreciate how hard you work to make sure that money goes to the right places, and we certainly appreciate the fact that you're here to further explain what's going on and how we can help you and how the neighborhood can help you in your assistance. So I open the floor to Marty Martinez, Chief Health and Human Services. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Councilor McCarthy, Councilor Campbell, and Councilor Garrison. Thank you for having us here and members of the administration to be here with you today. We're going to share a little bit of overall information with you in terms of how we're investing resources around violence prevention, intervention, and response. And then we're going to hear briefly from Maria Cheevers, the Boston Police Department, and Roy Martin from the Boston Public Health Commission, and Rufus Falk, who's here from our Office of Public Safety, to be able to answer questions that may come up, to offer some information. I too want to thank the folks that are here in attendance. I see many of our CBO partners that are getting funds through these investments. So thank you for being here. I see advocates and folks in the community. So thank you for being here, and we welcome the opportunity to share with you a little bit of what the city's doing around some of these pieces. On the overarching framework, as we dig into some of the specifics, I want to make sure that you understand that we, and as you all know, counselors, we approach violence prevention through a public health lens. And what that specifically means is we engage in programming and initiatives in 3 categories: prevention, intervention, and response. And in the prevention bucket, which refers to engagement and programming that takes place before an act of violence occurs, these are services and resources that are administered really in that prevention lens, ensuring that folks are engaged in enrichment opportunities, programming, employment venues, so that youth and young adults can engage in those opportunities. On an intervention bucket, we're talking about services that engage programming that focuses on either at-risk or proven-risk young adults, to engage them maybe before violence is happening but is en route to happen, or intervene to prevent it from going further than it had gone, so that we can find the supports necessary to help folks. Intervention is also where much of our work targeting specific populations with unique needs are taking place. So we're talking about work with gang-involved young people, formerly incarcerated youth and young adults. We're talking about work to diversion work, where folks who are coming out of DYS. We're going to speak to some of the programming that's happening there and some of those investments. And last but not least, in this framework that the city uses, we're also talking about a response as part of that element. Respond or recovery refers to services provided during and after an act of violence, and are meant to ensure that individuals, families, and communities that have been impacted by violence have the support they need to address trauma and heal. I saw several folks from our neighborhood trauma teams are here today, folks from our health commission. We're focused in ensuring that resources go to help communities connect with critical trauma-informed services in the wake of violence as it occurs. As my colleagues here are going to speak more about the funds that we're providing, specifically the 3 funding opportunities that you mentioned, Councilor Campbell, the Shannon Grants, SSYI, as well as the Youth Development Fund, I wanted to share a little bit with you about the city-funded specific violence prevention efforts that are here. We estimate that we spend over $12 million on a year on violence prevention efforts, specifically across 6 departments and agencies: the Boston Centers for Youth and Families, the Mayor's Office of Public Safety, the Boston Police Department, and some really targeted efforts, which I'll explain, the Boston Public Health Commission, the Mayor's Office of Returning Citizens, and the Office of Workforce Development. We're not talking about throwing everything at the kitchen sink that they do and say, here's a number, because that would be way bigger than $12 million. What we're talking about is direct and dedicated services in those departments that are focused on violence prevention, intervention, or response. Let me give you some examples. One of those is the SOAR Boston program, which formerly was our Street Workers program, but now stands for Street Outreach, Advocacy, and Response. It's a $3 million program that has street workers on the ground, in communities, in community health centers, in neighborhoods, working to engage young people in that prevention, intervention, and response category. Talia Rivera, our new director, is here with us today, and I did see a couple of street workers that are also here with us today. I did see you, so I know there's some folks here doing some work. Again, that program is a city-invested program where we're investing dollars into folks to work in communities and create coordination of services, and that in itself is $3 million. In addition, the Boston Centers for Youth and Families gives out $250,000 of funding to youth service providers around summer grants. Those are enrichment opportunities for organizations to scale what they're doing. Could be a local church, could be a tenant association, could be a community group, but those are dollars so there can be more enrichment prevention opportunities for youth and young adults in the summer. In addition, as another example, there's roughly $50 million between the Boston Police Department's Bureau of Community Engagement, the Centers for Youth and Families, prevention activities within parks. All of the enrichment and prevention activities that take place in those departments are meant to be exactly that: connect and engage youth and young adults to resources in the community and services that are taking place. So while the $12 million I gave you are specific violence prevention efforts that are happening across the board, whether it's a peer leadership program happening in the Health Commission, whether it's a pilot for 26-year-olds that we're working on in the Office of Public Safety, or the case management that's happening in the Mayor's Office of Returning Citizens, those dollars are directly going in to prevent, intervene, and respond to violence that's happening in the community. This is just city funding and doesn't even include the millions of dollars of grants that the city applies for throughout all of our departments to bring in resources to focus on violence prevention. And the police department does a lot of work that falls into this bucket as well, but I'm not including those resources because I'm trying to give you a finite understanding of what some of that funding is around this work. I'm going to pass it off to my colleagues. I'm going to start with the police department and Maria Cheevers to talk a little bit about SSYI, Shannon grants, if you will, and the Youth Development Fund. And then Roy's going to talk a little bit more about SSYI. But what I want to stress to our counselors and to our audience here today, the city has a strategic lens of how we're approaching violence prevention, intervention, and response. And we're investing resources in each of those buckets. But more importantly, we're lifting up gaps. So I appreciate the opportunity for the counselors to sort of raise up what resources are we spending, what metrics are we measuring for success, and how are we trying to make an impact on these issues in the community as they are today. All of these programs track data. All of them are working towards different outcomes and different measures, and all of them are trying to ensure that we're addressing not only the issues at hand in the community today, but some of the root causes that exist that create violence in our neighborhoods. So that's where we are in a generic way, but I'll now turn it over to Maria Cheevers to share a little bit about some of the pieces that fall under the Boston Police Department. Maria? Thanks.
And Maria, before you jump in, I'd like to welcome Councilor Anissa Sabi-George. Thank you. Thank you, Maria.
Welcome, and thank you for putting this together because we all welcome the opportunity to speak about the work that's being done in the community around violence prevention in general, and more specifically youth violence prevention. So I'll start with discussing the Boston Police Department's Office of Research and Development, which is the office that I lead. I have my staff here today. If you guys can raise your hands, I'd appreciate it. Is Jason. Jason is the grants administrator. We have our lead researcher and developer, Jen Savage. Frank in the back there is the program coordinator of SSYI, and Damon is the program coordinator for Shannon. And so what I'm about to talk about is really, I just want to thank them for their work in these efforts. In general, I'd like to first say that in the Boston Police Department, for about 20 years now, we've been applying for a great many federal grants as well as state grants to do community policing and to make Boston Police one of the premier community policing departments in the country. With that said, at this point in time, it's been a little strange with the new administration, but we currently are managing about $19 million across the board, and many of these grants are multi-year grants. With a wide range of grant programs, of which $4.2 million can be directly relayed or directly related to violence prevention. Three of the grants within that grouping are very specific to youth violence prevention, but we also have grants that work with police to do dual support for those that are mentally ill and have issues, emotional issues. And so I want to thank City Councilor Anisi, basically everybody at the table for that work, because without their support, without their support, we wouldn't have a dual response, mental health response with police. And because of that support, we have several clinicians now working for the city, doing ride-alongs with police to help people who are what they call EDPs, emotionally disturbed persons. And so one of those grants is a DV grant that allows us to hire domestic violence advocates to work with victims of domestic violence. We have one grant that's a community organizing grant, community mobilization, social norms change grant around trying to reduce harm for prostituted persons. And the other grant is very specific to work with police officers going to homes to make sure that sex offenders are registered where they say they're registered. So we're not going to talk a lot about the mental health, domestic violence, prostituted persons, and the SOAR grant today. I don't assume, but if you do have questions about those other grants that are violence prevention related, please feel free to ask me. Today, we can talk much more about the Shannon grant, SSY, and the Positive Youth Development grant. I want to thank Andrea Campbell for that one as well, and the work she did to make sure that that money was put in the budget alongside the mayor. And so, as I said, 25% of the overall grant money that we bring in on an annual basis is very much related directly to violence prevention. Other grant funds are indirectly related to violence prevention. And the operating budget of the Boston Police Department has other funds that are related directly to violence prevention. But today's hearing isn't about those funds as much as the grant-funded projects. With these funds, every single grant that we apply for, we are required to tell the funder exactly what outcomes and outputs we're measuring. And every quarter or every 6 months, we have to report back on those. Much of this money we take into the Boston Police Department, and with the help of the finance unit in the Boston Police Department, our office grants those funds out to community-based organizations. We currently provide support to 60 community-based organizations. I have their names here. I'm sure you don't want me to name off every single one of them, but if you do, I will, and I'll do it quickly because I talk very fast if I need to. And so through the way that we do assure that folks that we are giving money to are abiding by what they promise to abide by is through quarterly and biannual reports. Those reports are matched with financial program reports, and those program reports match the mission, goals, objectives, outcomes in every single grant. And we also have monthly meetings with folks that we provide funding to. We also provide training to folks that we provide funding to. So we not only train them on how to report back on their outcomes and outputs, but we train them on how to spend down their funds properly so that we're following all federal and state requirements to the letter when we do receive their financial reports alongside their programmatic reports. I'm trying to go through the questions that we were asked to prepare for before we got here, so I'm sorry if I keep looking down. Each grant program has a very specific and distinct set of matrix that we're required to report back on. If you're interested in knowing what those matrix are, we can get you copies of each one of those matrix. Yes. So,
The defined output.
yes. So what we often utilize in order to determine how we are going to meet our mission and vision and goals are what they call logic models. So 90% of the grants that we apply for, we're required to fill out a logic model. Logic models takes you from vision to then ask you a question, well, how are you going to meet that vision? And the answer to that question is your mission. Once you answer that question, you then ask yourself, well, how am I going to get to that mission? And that's when you start talking about program components and strategies. And so we outline every program component, and then under each program component, we have program strategies. And then under program strategies, they say, okay, well, what will the output look like? Which is a hard copy. It could be a report. It could be how many people you served. How many programs did you provide? How many trips? How many meetings? So those are outputs. Those are concrete things. Then outcomes. Outcomes is what was the impact of what you did by doing all those other things that we just talked about. And that's when we start saying, okay, X number of kids received X number of hours of GED training, or X number of young people received X number of hours of tutoring and physical activity and recreational hours and youth development and all kinds of clinical supports and programs and services. So the way in which that we assure that we deliver all that is to be breaking things down to that level of specificity and then getting people to understand the mind process of how do you build out an effective program model by following this now, as this is your work plan once we give you those funds. And then every quarter after that, we sit down with them with their work plan and we say, okay, what did you accomplish? How much money did you spend down? Does the money that you spent down match the needs that were present in that logic model, the strategies, the components, the missions, the vision, all the way up? And so we're very, very much flattening things out in a way that allows the folks that we give grant money to understand how to show us what your outcomes were in real concrete ways. So for example, right now we have that SSYI money. That SSYI money serves 17 to 24-year-old folks that have been directly involved in the criminal justice system, and we know that because they're in criminal justice databases. And you can't get in a criminal justice database unless you were arrested and prosecuted and charged. And so those are the folks that we're reaching out to both behind the wall and once they come back in the community and meeting with them one-on-one. And I'm going to let Roy tell you the details of that program. However, getting back to the matrix, we're required by the state who gives us this money to report back to them exactly how many people we served, exactly what services they took advantage of, how many times they were in that nonprofit organization, how many hours were they there, what did they get out of that? And so when people say, you know, how do we know that this is effective? We know this is effective because we press down so deep and so wide into those series of questions, and we make sure that they're answered. And we do site visits, and we have quarterly reports and semi-annual reports. And so, and then in the next year, if a service provider doesn't deliver, then they don't get the funding the next year. So, but we also give them the skills that they need to be able to work with us in a true collaboration in partnership. So we're training them about how to spend down their money, but also how to deliver their outcomes. And then we hold their hand throughout the process. And then for some reason, some organizations deliver really well, and some organizations struggle. And so when that happens, because we have to be responsible for the funder, we can't fund them again. And so, and one more point about that as well. Most of the money we get is federal and state money that we then in turn give back to the community. That federal and state money is a cost reimbursement system. So many service providers that are very small, locally based, residential, cannot apply for that money because they can't get access to a cost reimbursement type of process. Now, when I say that, if I'm a small nonprofit and I don't have enough money to hire somebody and pay them and then get reimbursed after the fact, then I'm not able to apply for those funds. And so that's one of the things we find ourselves in a catch-22 on. I think I've
Wait,
answered all the questions.
I just want to interject. So, I don't think so, but just
Okay.
I say that respectfully.
Can I go now?
So,
No, I'm joking.
I want to be mindful of the fact that we are here for just a short period of time. So we mentioned there's clearly millions across every department, but I'm going to specifically focus on SSYI, Shannon, and the Youth Development Fund because we know those funds specifically go to organizations that are tasked with doing violence prevention and intervention. Just to give context to the folks here and the people and my colleagues, can we go through quickly for the last round, for example, of SSYI, of Shannon, Youth Development Fund, how much was the total for each?
Yep.
How many, and I'm going back to questions here, for the total amount, so for example, for SSYI, if it's 1.7 million, I'm making that up, what's the breakdown of the specifics of that grant? How much goes to actual organizations? How much goes to city fees for these grants to be able to process and do the work? How much goes, if any, to salaries for folks who have to manage and do this work? How much goes to either the oversight or administration? So breakdowns for the specific amounts of each of those. And then the third question is the organizations, and maybe this isn't a question, that receive this fund. So for youth development, Shannon, SSYI, are those listed publicly on the website somewhere? I know you said there's 60. Yeah. So is that public and people go on a website to get the list for the Youth Development Fund grantees that receive the funding?
I just want to say, with regard to the Positive Youth Development Funding, Superintendent Daly is here. His office managed it last year. Our office is going to be managing it moving forward. So,
but is that the list? I think is the grant.
Yes.
Martin, I'm looking at
The list is public.
the list is public for Youth Development
Yes.
Fund on the website.
On the website.
Yeah.
Is it?
We can't.
Yeah,
Yes.
we can get you the website. Yeah.
Can you
I don't have the top of my head.
Okay, we can find out. And then for SSYI, and I know there's not only are the grantees listed for the Youth Development Fund on the website, the application process and the information with respect to that funding is also on the website. And we can make sure to get that before folks leave, even if my team members have to find it and slip me a piece of paper. The second is for Shannon grantees. Is that listed on the website of somewhere? Where is that listed? We can find that out, okay. And then, do you mind bringing me just a, we can write it down and bring it up. And then the last is SSYI, for the grantees for that is listed on the website as well, because we've got a lot of questions around that. Okay, so we'll make sure that we get the websites for those three so people can find who the grantees are. It is public. But then going back to this question specifically around the specific funding for each.
So I'm gonna speak to Shannon first. So last year, which was FY19, the city of Boston was awarded $1,559,014.18. $1,101,270 was awarded to city-led and community-based organizations through a competitive grant process. $274,000 of that were police-led efforts for 4 different units, as well as the Brookline Police. Now, that is something that is a requirement of the state, and so that is in that funding because it is within the state requirement for the Shannon funds. $113,000 is for staffing for the grant, including a program coordinator and a separate crime data analyst. And that includes both salary and fringe. $59,000 goes to the city of Boston at a 4% rate, which we had negotiated because typically the city of Boston admin rate is at 10%. Organizations listed in terms of who received the fundings last year was Boston Center for Youth and Families, Youth Options Unlimited, Youth Connect, the Boston Medical Center's VIAP program, Boston Asian Yes, Project Right, Maverick Land and Community Services, My Life, My Choice, Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, Boston Public Health Commission, Level Ground MMA, ESAC, Bird Street Community Center, Refugee and Immigrant Center, Youth Build Boston, Mission Safe, Boston Youth Wrestling, Medicine Wheel Productions, Teen Empowerment, Hyde Square Task Force, Mothers for Justice and Equality, the Freedom House, and ABCD. The choices for who receives funding year after year is made by a separate advisory group that is not made up of City of Boston employees, nor is it made up of nonprofit employees. So we try to choose people to sit on the advisory board that, as I like to say, do not have a dog in the fight, so they can't be biased towards one organization and the other. They're also required to read these RFPs and use a certain score-based criteria to vote on them. And then, based on the voting system, that's how we choose who gets the funding. So it's a pretty transparent and open system.
That's very helpful. And now for SSYI and Youth Development Fund. Appreciate it. Thank you.
So with regard to SSYI in FY19, the City of Boston received $1,008,691. With regard to that, the Boston Public Health Commission receives $459,659 because they provide all the case management and the outreach services for SSY case management staff. So of the number of 17 to 24-year-old persons that we serve, all of them receive direct one-on-one case management and outreach services, and Boston Public Health Commission provides that, and Roy's going to speak about that. We also provide $132,000 to clients themselves on stipends. A lot of these young people are struggling financially, and we want to make sure that if they're going to participate in a number of services, whether it be GED, substance use disorder, counseling, job training and placement, and all the other services we provide, that they receive stipends for when they do participate so that they can at least have something coming to them as they're trying to move forward in their lives. There's $37,919 worth of equipment. Last year we had to buy a separate van in order to take clients to different program services and keep them safe. We were given supplemental funding from the state last year to do strategic planning around wanting to serve high-risk women. So we were not only just serving 17 to 4-year-old men, but we want to also begin to serve women. So we had to hire a consultant. She brought in 25 to 30 service providers that were expert on serving high-risk women. We created a strategic planning process. That consultant also worked separately with the Boston Public Health Commission to help them better function their stipend system as well as their case management and tracking system. So between all 3 services that we received through consultant, that was $37,500. That's not going to repeat in terms of every year. We're not going to get consultant money. This was a special amount that was given us in the form of an amendment to take the program to a higher level in terms of efficiency. The service providers included Mission Safe, Project Right, JRI/Strive, Fathers Uplift, VUP BMC, Brigham and Women's, and CRJ's Brookhouse. And I can also talk about the specific matrix, or did I
So
say
youth, that's
enough
great.
about that?
The Youth Development Fund?
Yes.
Thank
So,
you.
Sorry. So in FY19, the Youth Development Fund had given $25,000 each awards to service providers that provide more prevention resources than intervention resources. And so this was sort of a different type of service provider that would receive these funds. And this was to keep kids gaining skill sets. So if anybody knows about what a youth development framework means, it's around youth development is about giving skill sets to young people that are both hard and soft skill sets that they can walk away with better understanding and hard skills to do new and better things, whatever that may mean. That could be I now know how to run a meeting. I know how to organize a community. I know how to do strategic planning. So each organization teaches them different hard skills. And so those organizations this year were All Dorchester Sports and Leadership, Ballet Rocks, Boston Scores, Center for Teen Empowerment, Crossroads, Dorchester Youth Collaborative, Friends of the Children Boston, Madison Park Development Corporation, More Than Words, Playworks New England, Project Right, Rehearsal for Life, ROCA, Roxbury Youth Works, Shooting Touch, Sociedad Latina, Sportsmen Tenants and Enrichment Center, Teen Center at St. Peter's Catholic Charities of Boston, Thompson's Island Outward Bound Education Center, and Zoomix. The total amount of funding provided through that was $500,000. And we were also required folks to provide a mid-year report out on their outcomes and a final report on their outcomes.
And for the outcomes, I mean, you spoke to that a little bit earlier. Thank you. It sounds like, I mean, some of this is defined by the state and doesn't sound like it's necessarily in specific terms. So how do we, from where we sit, where you guys sit, define what our outcomes are in terms of violence prevention and intervention, and what specifically, in like the layman terms, are those outcomes? And then how do we communicate those to the people, the grantees who are receiving the funding?
So,
and this isn't just directed at you.
yeah.
I mean, obviously,
So,
it could be any of you guys,
specifically
right?
for the 3 grant
Yeah.
programs, we have a final report, and that final report will tell you everything. How many people do we serve? How many people of those people received X, Y, and Z resources? How successful they were, and there's a number of things. So please feel free after today, if you're interested in our successes with all 3 models and our outcomes, I'm more than willing to send you those final reports so you can look at them in concrete terms and understand the successes we've had, more importantly, in partnership with those community organizations that I named earlier.
I do think SSYI, I think, Roy, within the SSYI, it'd be helpful to know the services that we are asking other organizations to provide related to the case management, because there are real specific things that we're asking people to do, and sometimes that's why people don't get funded, because they can't do those things. But Roy, can you talk?
Sure.
And it's important to note that they vary depending on the source of funding, right? Okay.
So, good afternoon, community. So my name is Roy Martin. I'm the director of the Safe and Successful Youth Initiative. And I think different from most programs that we have in the city of Boston. The program that I work for, we focus on proven risk young people. Now, I think in a lot of conversations, we tend to use words very loosely. And so the word risk we use loosely. So we could be at risk for a bunch of things, but when we're talking SSYI, we're talking specific, you are the risk of firearm violence. So we're talking about young people who are active in firearm violence, not people who are thinking about it, not someone that's being recruited, not people who stole bikes. We're talking about active shooters. And like Maria started to talk about, there's documentation, hence proof, the proven risk. There's evidence that these folks are active and they are a risk not only to themselves but other members of the community. And so when we say prevention in SSYI, we're very clear, we're talking prevention from shooting again. I'm not thinking about doing, you're not in a contemplative stage. And so you can almost guarantee that every young person enrolled in our program already has a firearm charge on his record, has likely been a DYS already, has likely been the South Bay House of Correction, or is returning from the Massachusetts Correctional Institute. And so for us, when we talk about what is the outcome, like for us, we understand, and this speaks to the challenge with a lot of providers, we understand the complexity of a SSY client. And so it's not as simple as a lot of people think. Like sometimes we hear people express what it takes to work with a very young, very involved in the streets young person. And what you'll find is they have a myriad of issues that you got to work on in order to help them achieve some degree of safety, stability, and success. So it's not one thing. So you can't come to one of these guys and say, all you need is a football program, that'll fix them. That's not real, not for these guys. You can't just say all he needs is his GED, not for these guys. So for a lot of these guys, they're similar to like in mental health services where there's such a thing as dual diagnosis, where there's more than one thing going on. And so the challenge, I think, with a lot of providers is providers typically specialize in one thing. And what you find is that now it requires the partnership, which I'm thankful for all of our partnerships, of 4 or 5 different agencies to work on one individual. And it's highly likely that that one individual has already gone through 4 or 5 different systems before they get to us. So we're not the program for the 99% of typical young people in the city of Boston, all right? We're designed for that 1 and less than 1% of individuals in the city of Boston who are actively shooting. And so to get your greatest yield, you're not supposed to go after someone who's not involved to reduce involvement. You got to go to the guys. And so sometimes, you know, you got to go where they're at. We're designed to go where they're at, hence the need for a vehicle, because prior to us, and I want to recognize Zach Rich in the audience from Commonwealth Corps, he's our tech support from the Executive Office of Health and Human Services. But prior to that, our vehicles, and our Monica Valdez-Lupi, our commissioner, we used to borrow Monica's commission cars to drive to Shirley, to go to the prisons, and drive to Springfield and Pittsfield to DYS before these young guys who are identified by some law enforcement source, whether it's DYS, probation, parole, you know, whatever, that this individual is of concern to them. And for some of us that don't understand what a proven risk young person looks like, he's the guy. When you're incarcerated, there's stay away orders while he's locked up. You can't put someone in the same unit as him. He's the guy, when you put him in their program, you have to worry about peer contamination. Where one young person in the program might mess around and leave with about 4 or 5 partners now, and those partners might be other young people who were at risk at the time. And so group services do not work, and they're not wise, and we actually need to be very thoughtful as adults why we put this established gangster or whatever in a classroom with a bunch of young people who are like, you know, just typical young people. And before you know it, you're creating more and more of the same type of behavior and problem. So the biggest struggle that we've had with some programs is, I think, if you don't understand what our client population is, you think I could have 10 of them in a classroom right now. I have 10 seats. Yeah, I could take 10 of these guys. You can't do it. Anyone that's from this city understands that there are young people that'll tell you, all of us, I'm not going over there. I'm not getting on that bus. I'm not doing none of those things, and I won't be in a class with him. And if you put me in a class with him, here's what's about to happen. And so we have to be mindful of that. We actually have to avail ourselves with resources so far outside even sometimes the greater Boston perimeter in order to make sure that we increase the possibility and potential for one of our engaged persons to be stabilized, safe, and successful. And so it's super challenging, but we're talking about a very tiny population. And, you know, I think in terms of what, will you?
I just want to ask you to make sure you tell the counselors that you subcontract with some folks.
We do subcontract.
Yeah.
We do subcontract. And I think what folks need to understand is we just based off our program design and the framework, the, you know, scientific method that we use, you have to move with the problem. And so programs don't have legs. You know, they are brick and mortar, and they are where they are. And so if the problem is in South End this summer, like I'm a Bromley Heath kid, folks from the neighborhood understand if you from Heath Street, at one point the issue was Academy. Then later on the issue's Heath Street H Block. Then Heath Street Academy are cool. And so I'm like, the problems move. You have to be fluid enough to move with the problem. So our contracts have to follow the need and where it's best to serve clients. And then lastly, we try to provide the services that the client actually asks for or that he will actually enroll and engage in. We try not to continue to contract with folks that the client just never goes to. And so we do keep records in terms of why we made decisions, why not to contract. And then for the most part, most of all of our contracts have understood and agreed to provide that service in kind. So I don't believe we've ever lost any partners, but in terms of contracting, the contracting has to go where the need is. And in terms of case management, we case manage all of our clients. We don't sub out case management. We did at one point, but as I mentioned, our technical support partners here, we were guided by the Executive Office of Health and Human Services. Basically, we were told to strengthen our model statewide, not just City of Boston. Statewide was outreach and case management. That is the skeletal structure. That's the bare bone of the assignment. And then what we're supposed to do is build on top of that structure with contractual relationships that enhance our ability to properly serve the client. So that changes, and as we evolve, we kind of think things differently, where best to spend our money. And so that's pretty much how our contracts are driven, but we RFP, and you know, so.
Quick question on that.
Sure.
I guess two, Roy, for you.
Sure.
Who does it well, right? So clearly, I know
Who
we've talked about the challenge in either addressing, and we're just using labels for not to label people,
Yeah.
right? That population that you're talking about,
Yeah.
some organizations, the struggle in finding organizations or individuals to actually reach
Yeah.
that population to make a difference. Who does it well, from your perspective?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other is, what's the number of folks we're talking about? Are we still talking about the folks on the brick, that list of like 300 folks, or is it something else?
No. So it is that it's a specific category of young persons. And then basically where those persons are basically accounted for are at the brick, because the brick verifies who, if you meet that threshold. In terms of who does it well.
And there's a few hundred on that list.
Yeah, but can I?
Sure.
Sorry.
Yep.
One thing to bring us I'm cautious to have an answer about who does it well, to be a fair counselor. So if you could give me some background as to what you're looking for, because I think there's many nonprofits in the room, and B, many nonprofits are funded through various categories here. So we're digging into one there.
For this
so
one.
I just want to be cautious that there's
Yep.
probably some folks who, and I just throw this out, there's some folks who think they do this work, and maybe they don't do it as well as we might want them to do. But I want to be a little cautious of the city determining, like, these 3 do it great, these 6 don't. I get nervous about that. I do because I think a lot of people do a lot of good work, and I don't want to undersell what CBOs are doing because they don't fit into a little box.
No, so-
Having run a CBO, that makes me nervous, but that's why I'm asking you to clarify that for us.
So my point is just, and I don't want to hog up time, so my point is to get at, clearly we have the Youth Development Fund, the Shannon Fund, the SSYI, all of which serve different purposes, different age groups, have a different purpose in mind. SSY in particular, and I don't know that there's other programs quite like it, is designed to really serve the toughest to reach, those who are in the life doing the violence that we're talking about. It's a small number of folks, right? It's about, the last list, I think it had about 300 people. Some of them are gang involved, or right. That's that tough population, 17 to 24. We haven't even talked about the higher ages and the difficulty in reaching them and programs for them. So I always like, if we're giving money out, some of it is internal, Roy, through your team and your work. I know how passionate you are and the work you do, and not only holding yourself and Health Commission team members accountable, but also organizations accountable. Some receive that fund and SSYI funding, and we've deemed that they do it, I hope, well. Some maybe not so well, or it's just, you know what, we've tried you and you can't quite get to those individuals to transform their lives, so we're going to maybe move on to someone else. So I'd be curious, I mean, on the websites of whether it's the police department or the Health Commission, there are all these organizations receiving funds, and no knock on any organization. Each organization receives funds for a specific purpose, right? Enrichment camps, mentoring, all of it makes a difference in some way. And so I'm not knocking that, but specifically for this harder to reach population, which is usually what we're talking about when, in terms of incidents of violence, who does it well? And so I think I have no problem with that, and I think we need to be either lifting those organizations up, learning from them, and then it also lets us know where the gaps are on the program side, that we need to really, either people need to be creating these organizations or finding individuals who do this work well to start to bring them into the fold for this age group and this high-risk population, and even for the older folks. So that's why I asked, because you're in this work. So I think we should be naming some stuff. That's all.
Anything to the council, who do you subcontract with?
That's okay.
Which might be
Call him like I see him.
So, I'll say this again. I think that the biggest challenge is following the client. So it's hard to say who's good or who's not good, but it's easier for me to answer who do the clients seem to
Respond
stick
to.
with. All right? So, and I think the difference between who ends up working well and who it may not work as well with is clarity. Certain folks are more clear about what they do than others, and they're very, very kind of singularly mission-driven. Notre Dame worked very well for us. Wow U is very clear about what they do. Project Right is very clear about what they do. Project Place is very clear about what they do. Morgan is very clear about what they do. Goodwill Industries, Morgan Memorial.
Serving different purposes. So some are doing, say, mental health work. Some are doing,
Yes.
Project Place clearly shows up in a different way than Project
Yes.
Right. Okay.
And it's
That's helpful.
it's what they bill it to be. You know, and there are other times, I think there are other programs that they're expansive, but their expert area is really the thing they do well. The expansion areas, sometimes I think they're kind of new, and they're not built for the outlier client. I don't know if I said More Than Words. More Than Words is very clear about what they do, and they're very spot on.
That's helpful, that's helpful.
Sure.
In the mic.
So the thing to clarify, because I would follow up with this question if I was asked. We don't give all those people money.
Right.
Okay, so some folks get resources because they feel and I'm gonna ask you to follow up on this. They feel a certain void or a certain piece we need. There's a bunch of partners that SSYI doesn't give money to. Many of them he just mentioned, because they feel a different sort of role within the partnership that's there. So I'm trying I don't want to add more confusion to the notion, because there are some partners here that Roy mentioned, and they're not on the list of getting any cash. So I want to make sure there's a clear understanding of when sometimes someone's a good partner because they fill a role, and other times there's a financial need to pay them for a client to access a service.
Right. Thank
So
you, Chief.
that's the distinction I want to make sure is clear, because if I look, I'd say, who you mentioned, I don't see him on your list. That's not exactly how the frame of it works.
Very helpful. And by the way, these lists are on either the BPD website or the Youth Development Fund. And if you have trouble, you can Google it. And if you have trouble finding it, just email our office, and we can send you the links or the information, because it shows up in different places, these lists.
So just in the interest of time, I'll say this, and then if there's any other questions, I'll answer them, but I'm sure there's questions you have for other folks. That's how we end up in contract. Like Fathers Uplift's here, that's how we got in contract with Fathers Uplift, because clients were going there. All right, that's how we got in contract with, first of all, we started, SSY was called PACT prior to it being SSY. And we started it with nothing. We didn't have nothing. All right, and so with no money, no contracts, no official relationships, no MOAs, all we had actually was a group of stakeholders. I thought I saw Andrea Perry here from Youth Connect, but Youth Connect and folks, it was the city folks that we didn't have a choice whether or not we were going to, I'm sure that's going to inspire Marty and Tracy and them. We didn't have a choice about if we were taking this assignment on. And then based off where we were getting good results, we were like, look, you're taking our guys, it's working out, maybe we can offset the cost of his seat in your classroom when we get in the contract. But if the clients are not going there anymore, because for whatever reason, then then we get stuck in the Maria situation. But I would encourage everybody, if you're doing good work, I'll find you or tell me who you are, and I would gladly try and connect someone to you. And if it works, yes, we will want to continue in that direction. If it doesn't work, no, we're not. Right. And I would just say, as a community member, I think I have a responsibility on behalf of the community. I don't care if I like somebody. Right. And I live here. Okay? So at the end of the day, I have just as much interest in violence being, reduced, in the city being livable for young people, for all of us, and making sure our young people, I don't believe they're all doing this voluntarily, as I mentioned earlier. In some young people, there's something else going on. And so as a result, let's make sure they get the care they deserve. And so if they're not getting it someplace, then, let's just move on to the place where they are getting it. That's the easiest way to do it. It's the smartest way to do it. No one's wrong because you're not designed to deal with outliers. Continue to work with the majority, 99% of young people in this city. And we'll figure out as a city what we're doing collectively to take on the assignments that are super challenging to others. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Roy. Before we hand it over to Rufus and Tracy, I'd like to welcome District 6 City Councilor Matt O'Malley. Rufus and Tracy? See, Tracy was late. He leaves the transportation department, and now nobody's moving. It just goes to show you.
Yeah, we're ready for questions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna just do a little. Councilor Garrison, did you have any questions? Okay, we're just gonna do a short, about a half an hour public testimony before we bring in the grantees panel, because I know I've got a couple people. I know some people from the DA's office want to make a comment, but they have another meeting that they have to go to, and there's another gentleman who also has another meeting that he has to go to. So I'll call off those names first, and then we'll keep you to the 2 minutes. So when you hear the beeper, don't just keep on talking, because that's usually what happens. So you got to focus. Okay, so this is That's who we're going first?
Lavelle Fox, if you folks.
Lavelle left? Oh, okay. All right, so that takes care of that. So we have a couple representatives from the DA's office? No? Did they leave too? Oh, great. So if you just come up to this mic, this panel, podium right there, please. Just your name and organization for the record.
And I think Lavelle, by the way, submitted written testimony. If he didn't, please ask him to submit written testimony. We keep all of it. Thank you.
Hi there. I'll be really brief. My name is Madeline Guerin. I'm here on the behalf of the DA's office. Thanks for giving me the chance to just say a couple words. I just wanted to relay that DA Rollins is really grateful for your holding this hearing today, and for your commitment to leading conversations around criminal justice reform and public safety. I see a couple other people from our office here, so thanks for, I think, see Bobby here and Ricky, our awesome head of community engagement. Our office is very committed to a vision of justice that's centered around our communities that we serve. And DA Rollins has led an effort focused on addressing the root causes of violence. That's something that's very important to her. So our goal is to listen, to learn. I'm glad to be here today to get to hear from this great panel. And again, thanks for your leadership and engagement on these issues. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So I'll call three. I'll call three at a time. That way you just kind of come up and queue up, and that way we're not wasting time waiting for people to come up. So Jayona Thomas, I know Michael Kuzo, you're on the back end. You're going to be on the panel, right? Are you on the panel? No? Oh, okay, you're not on the panel. So Michael, Crystal Kurtz, and Keisha Gamble. If you just kind of jump right up, and I'll start the timers when you're ready. Just your name and affiliation for the record, please.
Thank you very much.
I'm Keisha Gamble. I'll present for Friends of the Children Boston. Hello, everyone. I'm a Dorchester resident and professional mentor from Friends of the Children Boston. This is a long-term mentoring program that makes the 12-year commitment to working with children from first grade until they graduate. We are one of the organizations that receive funding from the Boston Police Department Positive Youth Development Grant. My job is a fun job, a difficult job. We are constantly fighting to be a positive distraction and sparkle a little glitter in children's lives. As a mentor, my worst fear each day is to receive a phone call that something bad has happened. I have had one of my girls call me when a vehicle she and her family was traveling in was targeted and shot at. Another one of my girls have been removed from her home and placed in protective custody because she was a witness to acts of gang violence. Each day, these children pass through metal detectors as they're into their schools and walk past them. They walk past makeshift memorials on their way through their community. We all know that the cycle of violence impacts our young people's ability to succeed. As a mentor, I teach my young people that teach them life skills that will not only keep them safe, but allow them to be productive young adults. We work on getting driver's licenses, financial literacy, positive womanhood, job and career readiness, just to name a few things. It is absolutely imperative that we light the way for steps to their success. With the support of this grant, my young people have achieved so much. One of them successfully completed her CNA certification before graduating 12th grade. I was able to support 9 of my girls successfully transitioning into college, and we urge the city leaders to continue to fund this important work, considering increasing the city budget, allocate into programs like Friends of the Children. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Jayona Thomas, and I'm here with Project Right. I'm here to talk about how a community center in Grove Hall is needed, especially for the youth, because I feel like a community center at Grove Hall will help the youth stay off the streets, and it will help prevent like violence and gun violence happening, because a lot of that has been happening, especially this month. And I feel like it will be a good addition to the community, and it will just help bring us closer together. Yeah,
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you, Gianna. Gianna was the STEM Middle School Student of the Year, by the way, just so you know. A King School graduate going to O'Brien. I was going to talk about the number of projects that we get funded on, but I got an email today after inquiring twice that we were turned down. We run youth programming after schools at the Burke from 5 to 9, Monday through Thursdays during the summer and through the past couple of years. And all of a sudden I got an email saying, oh, you're not going to be renewed from August 12th to the 29th because we have to clean schools. Well, it doesn't take 3 weeks to clean a gym floor, and usually they clean the gym floor right before the high school basketball season starts. So it doesn't make sense, especially when you have Columbia Road going on, you have Maple Street, you have Humboldt, you have all these lines that's going on. We're trying to find safe places. I have a young person who's experienced 2 traumas that the only way I can get to him, I can't talk to him during the day. He doesn't want to come to work, but I can talk to him during basketball when we do stuff for late nights at Friday Night Wine. So I need your help to at least work out some accommodation before I go ballistic with the, with the school department saying this doesn't make sense. They've been very helpful because they've been provided access for us through the Burke. We've done 2 weekend events at the Frederick. That's brought in a lot of folks, but it makes no sense as to, okay, we're convening this hearing, but then the school department's not allowing access to facilities for us to provide violence prevention on a corner where Columbia Road and Geneva Ave is so tenuous right now. So that doesn't make sense to me right now. The other part on this is that we do want you to fast track the co-wiring options for Dorchester, and we think it has to be in Grove Hall. We have a site, 4048 Geneva Ave, that would be conducive for a widespread safe haven youth driven with seniors, a broad community center that would really provide a violence prevention programming for that. So we do want to work with you on that. I can talk to you later about Boston Public Health Commission, the trauma, the neighborhood trauma grant, the Shannon, and Youth Development Fund, but I'll do that another time. Thank you.
Michael, what were the dates on the Burke?
16th to 26th. August 12th to August 29th.
12th to 29th, okay.
And actually, it's right here, so the email's right here.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, Michael.
Councilors, thank you so much for the opportunity to participate this afternoon. My name is Crystal Kurtz, and I'm a managing director with Third Sector. We're a nonprofit consulting organization that advises governments, community organizations, and funders on how to rethink the way they pay for and invest in human services. A recent project that we've done here in Massachusetts with the Department of Transitional Assistance was centered on the insight that as of 2018, 45% of the adults participating in these programs were born from families that also participated in these same programs. Commissioner Jeff McHugh recognized that we have to do just something different here to break this cycle of poverty. We started with working on a single funding stream for the Young Parents Program. We looked very closely at what was being contracted for and recognized that over the past 10 years, there had been financial incentives in these contracts, and yet we still weren't achieving the outcomes that we desired. So we took a step back. We looked at the stakeholder engagement, how providers were participating in the way contract terms were shaped, and the way we measured outcomes throughout the life of that contract, and the flexibility that they had to be able to adjust their service models throughout the life of the contract in order to achieve these outcomes that we all desire. A lot of this is based on not only metrics that everyone agrees to, but the data sharing between the agency as well as the providers such that they can learn from one another. Thinking about continuous improvement processes, so we're not locked into a 10-year service plan, and incentive structures, both financial and non-financial incentive structures, including thinking about being incented to work with distinct populations or altered data and reporting requirements that loosen up some of the constraints and allow time to work on other things. Just one more brief thing. I'm a 21-year resident of Charlestown. I'm a mother of 2 Boston public school students. I recognize in Charlestown, in the time I've been there, violence has reduced significantly. I also recognize that this is not the case in all of our neighborhoods, and outcomes are very different for many different individuals, and the experiences are very different. I appreciate the discussion that we're having here today. One of the things I think that we're really missing is a comprehensive picture of our violence prevention funding. When I look at our city's budget of $3.48 million, and I look through all the budget line items, I can't find the specifics around these priorities. And I understand that funding is braided from many different places, but without this whole picture across city, state, federal, and philanthropic funding, it's really hard for us to together articulate, what are the outcomes that we would like to achieve as a community in our neighborhoods and measure our progress towards those. So I think the City of Boston has a significant opportunity here to engage our neighborhoods in bringing more transparency to this funding, as well as agreeing to what outcomes we desire as a community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
PJ McCann, Priscilla Banks, Tony Wiley.
Tony's actually going to be on the panel.
Oh, Tony's going to be on a panel. Never mind. Tony, we'll see you in a little bit.
Yes, Tony. Yes. Yes, both. Both. Thank you, Tony.
Dom, I can't read your writing, but I think it's Dom.
Ms. Vaughn, Ms. Dora Vaughn. Did you sign up, Ms. Dora Vaughn?
Oh, it's Dora. Okay.
No? Okay, no.
No. Okay. And Safa.
No, they actually didn't sign up.
Oh, okay. But you checked the no
wrong
box. All right. No worries. No worries. Okay. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Priscilla Flint Banks. I am the co-founder of the Black Economic Justice Institute. I am a founder member of Mothers for Justice, and I'm also a founder member of the Blue Hill Corridor. And I was going to say something, but I have a question to ask. Did you say that out of the $274,000 that Brookline gets some of the money?
So we'll go through the chair. Make your
Okay, so I just want to know, do they get money, and why do Brookline get money?
So what are the requirements of the Shannon Grant is that the Boston Police partner in a multi-jurisdictional fashion with an adjoining police department. It's a very small amount of money. I can actually ask Damon to speak more specifically of how much money it is and what exactly it is used for.
Okay, I would like to have the answer to that.
Yep, Damon.
And just as another thing, I'm running for city councilor at large.
Yeah.
Brookline does get $13,000.
Okay.
It's for police communication, any kind of gang activity or any kind of violence that may cross those borders. Brookline was the only one that was available. Other police departments, Quincy, Cambridge, are also in another Shannon component. So
Sure.
part of any other linking.
And it's required.
Okay. So for the record, it was required by the state. Boston hooked up with Brookline, who did not have any Shannon grants, and we give them about $13,000 a year. So thank you. Okay, so we called a couple people who, is there an Albert who wants to speak, or a Chaplin who'd like to speak?
Oh, Tina Cherry.
Where's Tina?
Right here she comes. Tina Cherry.
Oh, okay.
Chaplin.
Oh,
Tina Cherry.
hi, Tina.
Yeah.
Couple rules in government: never speak after Tina speaks.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi.
Before I go, I'm going to turn the mic over to Charlita, who is a part of this generation.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being present with us today. I appreciate the opportunity to offer my testimony, and I'm super grateful that you brought this hearing into our community. As a young person growing up in Dorchester, I have grown increasingly fed up with the single narrative attached to my community. The stories that only make the news when there's a shooting, killing, or robbery involved. It seems like when Dorchester is brought up, it's only the challenges, and that the news reporters have skipped over the story of the 10 youth hosting their own peace rallies or the neighbors who come out for the community cleanup day. I truly believe that when it comes to prevention, that our focus needs to shift. It needs to shift from solely the challenges of our community, but also the assets and investing in those assets. The first point of action is the youth. The youth are our assets. We need to get rid of the idea that our young people are the problem, because they're not, because they are an instrumental part of the solution. They are the assets in which our community needs to invest in. They hold so much power in the direction this community will take, and if we'll be having this public hearing 20 years down the line. Not only is this a core value at the Peace Institute, but we are instilling this through our girls group, Stars and Stripes. Stars and Stripes does not have a funding source, but we continue this because it is an important program to take place. Stars and Stripes started off as a support group for young women survivors between the ages of 17 to 24, where they could find support but also learn life skills. But earlier this month, we opened it up to younger girls, adopting a mentorship style approach due to the request of the older girls, who wish they had this type of investment in their future when they were younger. Through this program, we are creating and continuing the cycle of investing in the assets of our community. And this is how waging peace in the city of Boston can be achieved. Thank you.
And it depends. If I don't have enough time, that's okay, but her voice is what's important because she is this generation. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate the opportunity again to be here and just offer testimony. 26 years ago, my 15-year-old son, Lewis, was caught in the crossfire. 26 years later, here we are. The young people that are shooting and the young people that are being killed were not even born when Lewis was killed, and yet we're still blaming the children. We have actively been working with our partners in the provider community and government to improve public policy, and we are slowly removing barriers to equitable homicide response. You see, the impact players, the shooters, when they are dead, all resources shut down for the families, and the shame and stigma and the cycle of be killed continues. Primary prevention is an approach that still needs the city's full investment. We must wage peace. How can we do that? The Peace Institute currently receives some funding through the Boston Public Health Commission and the Boston Police Department through the Shannon Grant. Yet, in order to really fulfill violence prevention and peace education in the city, for us, an investment of at least $200,000 annually for 2 years is required for us to turn hot spots zone into peace zones. It is time for us to remove that our children and our community is the problem. Who is then held accountable 25 years later when the young people were not even born when Lewis was killed? I'm closing. My grandson is 6 years old. I don't want to be in another community talking about gang and gun violence. I am honored and impressed. I am a member of this city. I am not going anywhere. 25 years later, I am sick and tired of the only time our community gets funding is May, June, July, August, September, and October. And then we don't talk about violence anymore. I want to close with this. Back in the 1990s, our city was in much agony and tension were so high, yet we changed things. There's this thing called the Boston Miracle. That became a national model. Let me tell you what the Boston Miracle was. Then Attorney General Janet Reno commissioned a report entitled Youth Violence, a community-based response, one city success story. In there she writes, the key to Boston's success lies in its community-based partnership. Community justice is a process of identifying public safety problems, creating partnerships within community, and building bridges among all parts of the justice system to address these problems effectively. The Peace Curriculum was one of those programs. In her 26-page report, she said that contributed to the reduction of juvenile crime in the city of Boston. Counselors, those are the curriculums that were there. Our curriculum were the first in the country to include the teaching of loss and grief as part of our children's social skills. Boston Public School is missing at this table. We must invest in early prevention. Research tells us that if we truly are to address the issues of guns and gang violence, we must go upstream and start with the children as early as kindergarten. We are here. We are committed to work with the city. We are committed to working with our entire city. We just met with the chief, with the mayor, with our commissioner to really, again, begin to move this as a national model. We must invest in primary prevention that gives us possibilities, that in end, we are a city of peace, the city that we all know we want and we live and we are. I want to thank you so much for this opportunity. I don't come to meetings, I don't come to hearings because I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Yet, I am committed. To those of you that are here, we have a mother whose child is in prison for murder, is going up on parole, and no resources. So I would love to talk to those of you who are working with the reentry, parole, and probation. Because if he gets parole, you know what's going to happen? Yes, we know what's going to happen. And all resources will shut down. So I'm here, and I'm looking forward to continuing this work. And I thank you guys for your support. Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna bring up the second panel, the grantees.
We're going through.
We're gonna go through.
Yeah, we have a whole list. We're going through in the order in which people signed in, so we're not cutting people off.
Yep. The grantees panel: Charles Daniels, Yi Chin Chen, and Tony Wiley, and Yotam Ziera from Roca. Please.
Just as we're making this transition, and you know, I to the audience sent a lot of questions to the administration with respect to the amount of monies, the sources of those monies, whether of course it comes from our own budget or state grants or the federal grants, who receives that money, the outcomes that we as a city define for violence prevention and intervention when handing that money out, the metrics or data metrics we use to determine whether or not we are being successful, questions around the application process. Sometimes the city uses RFPs, sometimes they use other means to give out the money. And I think whether it was Crystal or some others who stated it best, that we still have tremendous work to do to paint the picture because there's still so much that's still unclear. And like I said, we weren't going to address it all in one hearing, but I think we need to think about establishing a website of some sort and collaborating just within our own city, across departments, to get a true sense of how much money is there, the breakdowns of these resources, some of which was cited by Maria with respect to some grants. That should live in a public space that people can see, the list of grantees, the outcomes of the work, and yes, it can vary across different organizations. Sometimes they can be mentoring organizations or those dealing with high risk, because in putting all of that out there, it also demonstrates where the gaps are in terms of meeting the needs of those we're trying to reach to reduce incidents of violence. So we still have a lot of work to do, and I just wanted to name that. I know a lot of folks had to leave. I still have a lot of questions. Many of the questions that I sent beforehand, I still have, I still want more information, but out of the respect of time, but also the providers, which is a different perspective, I of course want to hear from them. We want to hear from them, but just wanted to name that, that we still have more work to do in this space. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, guys.
Whoever's comfortable with the opening statement will be
Yeah,
fine.
and say your name.
Charles Daniels is first on the list, so.
Yep, so is this the period where I do my...
Yep, absolutely.
All right, thank you. My
Just
first
speak
time,
into
so-
the,
Into the mic, yeah, absolutely.
and say
Thank
your
you.
name and organization for the
Yes,
record.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Charles Clayton Daniels Jr., and I am the founder and CEO, co-founder, along with my wife, of Fathers Uplift Incorporated, the country's first outpatient mental health and substance abuse treatment facility exclusively for fathers and the fatherless. All right? So that's me. And now I'm about to read my testimony that I prepared today. All right? Awesome. So, first and foremost, thank you for this invitation. Over the last few years, I have had the opportunity to meet some amazing residents in the city, both behind bars and within this community. Daily, I have the privilege of returning home to my son and my wife and sitting at the kitchen table with them. Every man wants to be able to put food on a table for their loved ones, place a roof over their head, have a form of employment that pays the bills, and remain safe in his community. Unfortunately, many of the men we serve are not able to do this. As a result, their worth, dignity, and self-respect is stunted. When this occurs, they return to alternative means, such as those that are plaguing our community right now. Sadly, out of the 2,977 respondents at Fathers Uplift that we serve with a $500,000 budget in 2018 that received mental health services up to this point and completed a basic needs assessments, the top 4 basic needs that were identified as lacking were as follows: legal support, housing, employment, and family, in that order. And we have data that backs it up. These things are basic and necessary to anyone living in this world. You imagine for a second sitting at your kitchen table and watching those you care about suffer, and there is nothing you feel you can do about it. Nothing. Eventually, it will take a toll on you. I'm convinced that the question is not about whether the resources are available. We are one of the wealthiest cities in this country. The question is, where are we distributing the resources? And that's why we are here today. At Fathers Uplift, the clients we receive are in need of adequate employment that would allow them to do all the things that every man wants to do for his family and himself: provide shelter, basic care, clothing, and safety. Giving these men a chance, however, with their history, is our responsibility. And there's many people in our city that can give them a chance. They are also in need of an aggressive act of love where trained therapists that look like them, may I add, are available to them whenever they are in need. Organizations like mine need resources to hire more Black and brown therapists that can serve the growing demand of men trying to do and be everything that society blames them for not doing. Now, as a new partner of SSYI, we receive $15,000 to serve SSYI participants. And we are thankful for the contribution. And we just started this year. Now, I'm not going to add any more to that, but I am going to close this second. If we are going to decrease violence in the city, we must aggressively create opportunities so that healing can take place concurrently. As a formerly incarcerated young man once told me a couple years ago when my wife and I started Fathers Uplift, he said, "Charles," and I quote, "you cannot expect me to talk about my feelings, address them, and I return to seeing my family struggle, and the ones I care about die every single day. Something has to give. If we don't give them the opportunity, they will continue to turn to alternative means to survive and protect themselves, thus creating their own opportunities. They're creating their own opportunities. We have problems, yes indeed, but we also have the resources, which we heard today. I hope my thoughts as well as my input is integral to strengthening our city's violence prevention efforts. With gratitude and appreciation, thank you.
My name is Yiqing Chen. I'm the Executive Director of Friends of the Children Boston. We are one of the $25,000 grantee from the Boston Police Department Positive Youth Development Grant Program, and this is the second year that we have received that fund. So Friends of the Children Boston is a very unique long-term mentoring program that really believes in investing heavily on young people who need the help for however long they need it, no matter what happens to their lives. Friends of the Children selects children in kindergarten, and we chose children who, at a very, very young age, already have the odds stack up against them. We look for young people who are already missing days of schools, who already have a very unusual rate of suspension at age 5. And we promise them and their families a caring adult who is going to be their partner in every aspect of their life through their entire childhood, from kindergarten all the way through high school graduation, a minimum of 12 and a half years of commitment for every child that we select. You heard from one of our mentors, Keisha. She's one of our adolescent mentors. Through the grant, we were able to provide 60 young girls and young women with a mentor just like Keisha. They are in schools, they are in their homes, they are in their communities. They're working towards goals and hopes that these young people have for themselves, and they're also supporting the families who are struggling to just make every single day meet. I would really urge, I would say everyone here is of the same choir, right? We want this, the right thing and the best thing for our young people, and we don't want the violence to continue to be pervasive, and we want to be able to have our young people focus on and be able to elevate the assets that they have. I would also urge the committee to think about, instead of looking at violence prevention as its own thing, to think about addressing our housing crisis as a strategy for violence prevention, addressing food insecurity as a strategy for violence prevention, things like transit justice, racial justice. All of these are root causes of reason why young people are find themselves in the positions that they're in. Nobody that we come across, no families that we come across want to be in the positions that they're in. And yet every single day they're getting eviction notice, they're being told by the school department that their children's special education needs are not able to be fulfilled. All of these are contributing factors and compound over time. I am for that gentleman that says you gotta follow them everywhere they go. We have young people who changed schools 7 times in a matter of 1 year. If you're a service provider that only stay with them in one school, then that services get dropped. And they move geographical community and you drop them because they move to a different neighborhood. That's not how you can do the work. And Friends of the Children invest dollars behind being able to follow young people wherever they go, no matter what happens in their life, even if they're moved from their home or we're going into shelters. Our mentors are there every single moment, and it takes a lot to do that work, and we need partners. So, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Tony Wiley, and I'm Executive Director of Sportsmen's Tennis and Enrichment Center. Sportsmen's was founded more than 50 years ago to leverage tennis to improve academic outcomes for youth. We've built highly effective academic programs and now also focus on physical health, social and emotional wellness, and for the past 10 years, youth violence and police community engagement. In 2009, we created Volley Against Violence, VAV, as a way to bring police and youth together to combat negative stereotypes on both sides, break down neighborhood turf wars, and ultimately reduce youth violence. VAV welcomes between 85 and 100 children every Friday night, and officers from the Boston Police, the Mass State Troopers, the Youth Violence Strike Force, the Housing Authority, and the Transit Police. Police cadets come through the program first as a class and then often return individually to continue this interaction. In the words of one officer, police tend to see kids as either the victims or perpetrators of crime. VAV reminds them to first see and interact with kids just as kids. In creating Volley Against Violence, we secured a grad student from the Boston University School of Counseling and Psychology to embed herself in the program for a year and develop a curriculum that would help youth understand their ability and responsibility to create safer communities in daily interactions by treating each other with respect and understanding the role and authority of police. These goals may seem like low-hanging fruit, but many children are taught from the time they can walk and talk that police are the enemy, and that people who live on one street are always at war with people who live on another. So solving these types of issues at an early age is an effective model of prevention and intervention. We chose a curriculum called Teaching Personal and Social Responsibility, developed at the University of Chicago, to use physical education classes to teach children concepts that include respect, self-direction, leadership, and empathy, and then helps them transfer those lessons to their lives outside of the gymnasium. We've had ongoing evaluation assistance from graduate interns from the Harvard Chan School of Public Health, the Boston University School of Public Health, and others. We measure the efficacy of the overall program and confirm that our discussions are on point. Last year, 680 unique children participated in Volley Against Violence. 48% were African American, 27% Latino or Latina, 13% Asian, 7% biracial, and 57% female. 27 were between the ages of 11 to 18, and 73% between 7 and 10 years old. 36 police officers participated, as did 50 other unique volunteers. We learned, for example, that among our teens, 100% have heard gunshots in their neighborhoods, 50% feel unsafe, and 60% said there are gangs and/or drugs prevalent. Only 40% feel safe at school, and 30% said there are gangs active in their schools. More than 35% acknowledge that they do not live with immediate family. Among the younger children, 20% said they were not sure if they might feel safer in a gang when they were older. And only 50% said they have someone they can talk with that they trust about these types of concerns. We've received an average of $19,000 per year over the last 6 years through the Shannon Grant for Volley Against Violence. Shannon funds support program staffing, including junior counselors, most of whom came to us as young VAV participants. We've also received 2 years of funding under the Youth Development Grant, which we also use for youth training and employment. Youth violence is a complicated issue with a wide range of causes and implications. No one approach is going to provide a lasting and effective solution. It will take a network of efforts, programs, organizations, and strategies to build safer communities and provide better outcomes for our youth. Sportsmen is a proven entity. We are known and trusted in the Boston community, and our partnerships bring more than 5,000 children into our programs every year. Therefore, we've created a partnership with Children's Services of Roxbury to provide immediate counseling and referrals for at-risk families. We've allowed the Boston Police to distribute weeks of free summer camp for young people who might otherwise have idle time and harbor thoughts of following an older sibling into gang life. These are the types of intervention strategies that can only be successfully implemented with a diverse group of providers applying their own unique competencies and assets and working collaboratively to address this crucial issue. We appreciate your time and interest in this important matter and look forward to continuing our work throughout the city on behalf of our youth and families.
Thanks, Tony.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yotam Zaira. I'm from Roca. Thank you, councilors, for putting together this important hearing. I also want to thank our partners in the Boston Police Department, in the Mayor's Office of Health and Human Services, the Mayor's Office of Public Safety, and also the Mayor's Office of Returning Citizens. And I also want to thank all the people who participated today, and specifically the people who testified and the other people on the panel. I really agree with you that it's a network of efforts to reduce violence and not just one intervention. I think the best description to the population that Roca serves is the one that was given by Roy Martin earlier, which is really a small group in the city that has a lot of impact on everyone and is very, very deeply involved in criminal justice and in violence. We have been working in the greater Boston area for 31 years doing this work. We have a physical site in Boston since 2014. And we do this work in other places as well. And I think probably the best testament to the fact that this is the population we serve. In other cities in the Commonwealth, SSYI chose ROCA to be the lead agency. So for instance, in Springfield, in Chelsea, in Holyoke, and in Lynn, we are the lead agency for SSYI. We work very closely with the police department on that. And the city of Baltimore, who in the past year had a murder a day, 175 were shot in the head. 175 people, most of them young people, were shot in the head. When they did a review of what they need in the city that they didn't have before, they requested ROCA to come in, and we are now marking a full year of service in the city of Baltimore. So this is the type of work that we do and have been doing for quite some time. There were questions about outcomes and about retention. I really agree with what was said earlier and what you said about it's really hard to serve this population if you're not willing to go to wherever they are and doing it relentlessly and doing it in multiple places. We called our version of this outreach relentless outreach, a little bit like stalking, but legal. We do go multiple times to a lot of people, even when they refuse, until they're really willing to engage, because we think they matter. And we do it for 4 years, each one of them. I also agree with what was said earlier about the fact that it really matters if you can actually hold on to these people and work with them long time, because otherwise how do you have any impact? Our data says that we retain 79% of the people in our model. So this is in terms of retention. We worked with 239 young people in Boston in the past year. Also, there was a question about outcomes and what does that look like. Our model, like Maria explained earlier, our model is designed in a logic way to actually achieve the outcomes that we say we do. The two outcomes we always want to see are outcomes of reducing in recidivism and an involvement in the justice system. And the other outcome we want to see is increasing employment, because it's really hard to survive out of crime if you're not working. In the past year, 86% of the ROCA participants had no new arrests. 93% no new incarcerations, 78% were placed in a job, and 66%, two-thirds of the young people we work with, were working more than 3 months. I know there was a question about funding. ROCA is, in Boston specifically, we are funded through the Positive Youth Development for a specific project that I haven't talked about yet with Central American Youth in East Boston. It's a slightly different project, and it's small scale. That the Positive Youth Development Fund, and we're very grateful for this funding. We are not funded by the Safe and Successful Youth Initiative, by SSYI, but not because there's anything wrong with the way that the city spends this money or makes decisions around this, but simply because we haven't asked before, because we didn't need to. For the first 5 years in Boston, we were very lucky to be part of a public-private partnership that allows us to go to work and prove that what we do actually works. And we did this. We did it since 2014, and we continue to do this. We're staying around here. We keep working in this. We're not going anywhere. But we did let the mayor's office know, and the police commissioner know, and the Office of Health and Human Services last April, that the funding for new enrollment through this partnership is ending, and is ending at the end of this month. And this is why we submitted a request to be included in SSYI, similar to other cities where we do this work. We don't think that we should be the only ones who do this work. There's a lot of people in this room that do very important work, including through SSYI and other services. We hope that we have some role to play in this work as well, and we're happy to take any questions about the work or any specific thing in Boston. Thank you.
To what you got a minute ago, and I think it's important to highlight the work of the organizations that are receiving the specific sources of funding, and that the response to incidents of violence, of course, prevention, intervention, reentry has to involve numerous organizations doing different things, of course. So I appreciate the work that each and every one of you have done. I've been engaged at your sites, engaging with your youth. I know that you are actually serving youth versus you show up maybe somewhere and you're like, where are your young people? So thank you very much. My only question really is around what you, in your interactions with the city of Boston, one, where we could do better, and where you think some of the barriers are, and you having probably the greatest impact that you probably can imagine in serving young people or older populations. If briefly, that'd be great. Thank you.
So I think for Sportsmen's, some of the non-cash resources that we need, certainly every nonprofit needs more money, so I'm not going to go ahead and say that, but you know what's out there. We need more information about the youth that we're serving. I certainly understand issues of privacy, but for example, we run a year-round after-school program in addition to the summer camp. Because we are an academic program, if we're working with a child that has an IEP, we should be at the table for that conversation. But there are confidentiality issues that don't allow us to have those conversations. Oftentimes kids get to summer camp, and it's then that we find out that they have a myriad of support systems that are keeping them in the school system, but we didn't know about that until they got there. So now we're playing catch up. So for example, we have an 8-year-old girl in our summer camp who has been in a fight at least every week, in some cases every day, that she's been with us. And yesterday, in trying to sort of debrief with her and get an understanding of what's going on, I said to her, what do you think started the fight? What let you know there was about to be a fight? And she said, he made eye contact with me. This is a kid who clearly has some issues that were not brought to our attention. And the parents, I understand they're afraid that if they share it, we may not accept the child, which is not true. We just would be more prepared. Some of the challenges around trying to work with a social work agency or social service agency, we don't have the funding. It's not something that's easy to fund. So if the city could help us make some of those relationships happen, it would just be very helpful. Rather than us trying to find the money, find the right agency, and try to make the partnership, if the city could help us with some of the needs that we need that are non-cash, that is one thing that would be very helpful.
Thank you, Tony.
I think several things for us. First and foremost, I think what we have seen in our interactions with the city of Boston as it relates to funding, and I want to be frank, right, is that when you have young men who are involved in these shootings, who are fired up and excited about attending and participating in therapy, then all of a sudden you get a call stating that their therapy appointment has been canceled, and the young man is thinking that he's coming to therapy. That's an issue. Right? If a mental health service appointment is going to be canceled, we should be able to make that call, right? Not individuals who are not necessarily involved or have the expertise as it relates to mental health services. So I think adding more value to the provision of mental health services and not abruptly canceling sessions without communicating that with the provider first, right? I think we talk about our interest in wanting to have our young men and women participate in quality mental health services, but our actions have to be in alignment with that, right? So for us, that is a primary issue. Secondly, as an educated man, I recently found out, right, that the Cannabis Control Commission could actually issue license to individuals to deliver the product, as well as provide consultations to the companies that are growing the product, right? So not only can you open a dispensary, you can transport it, you can consult companies, and I think our young people know a lot about the product, right? But they don't know about this process, about the licensing. But other communities are benefiting immensely on this new cannabis business. I think renewable energy and issues of cannabis control are burgeoning opportunities for jobs, right? But our young men don't know anything about it. And as a young man with 2 master's degrees and a bachelor's degree, I didn't know about it. And if I didn't know about it, what makes you think these young men who are shooting up the place how much they know about it? Not much, right? Last but not least, I would say this in terms of housing, right? Housing is a huge issue. And if we are saying that there's a small percentage of young men that are involved in gang violence in the city, it shouldn't cost that much money to house them, right? We have to begin to create opportunities to provide adequate housing for these young men. Majority of the young men who are gang involved are homeless. They're couch surfing, right? Many of the men that we serve, we were serving gang involved youth prior to receiving SSY funding, right? Prior to receiving $15,000 of SSY funding. And this is what we've seen so far. Housing is a huge issue. And last but not least, I talked about employment earlier, but I want to touch on employment a little bit more. I can't tell you how many times my wife and I and our staff hear young men having to revert to selling crack and drugs because they can't get adequate employment. I think we have to do more than the typical summer jobs. We have to do more than the Taco Bells and the McDonald's, right? I think we have to do more than the Chick-fil-A's, right? Or the freaking McDonald's or Burger Kings, right? You think about the cost of living in Boston. They need to begin at least $50,000 or $60,000 to make a living and to even think about not wanting to shoot or not wanting to sell drugs. But that conversation is out of question, right? I think these young men are stunted by their histories, and I think we have to begin to show compassion and forgiveness to give them opportunities where people outside the city may not give them opportunities, right? So I want to talk about real jobs, right? I want to talk about housing opportunities for this small category, because they said it was a small category earlier, right? I think when we look at the budget of how much money this state receives, we can think about ways of providing adequate housing for these small percentage of young men. There are cities outside this country that provide lots of small housings, right? Small houses in communities, right? Houses that cost between $30,000 to $60,000 to build, where you get air conditioning, you get heat. I think we got to start thinking innovative about providing resources and opportunities for these young men instead of blaming them and talking about why we need to stop the violence. We can, but they need to eat too. And I'm tired of going home and being the only one to eat when I have young men in my agency who can't eat. They have to go to Taco Bell. That's an issue with me, and I can't sleep at night. So sorry that I preached a little bit, but that's how I feel, and that's what I see.
It's hard to follow Charles, and we know each other too. So, I think as an organization that work in every facet of a child and the family's lives, one of the biggest challenges that we bump into is communications between different city agencies. Our families are at intersections of all of the systems, right? They got a social worker from child welfare system, they got a social worker from school, they have an IEP meeting scheduled on Thursday, they got a housing court on Friday. I mean, that is a full-time job to keep up with it. And oftentimes, our mentors, because they work in every aspect of their life, end up being the only person who has all of the information. We oftentimes will show up to school without, having worked with a family who's been homeless, having the school go, wait, what? The child has been homeless for 6 months? We didn't even know about that. That should not be the case. And I don't know how to fix that, but I think that communications is a huge issue in that. I know that another thing that I would mention, being a long-term model, you really get to see families thrive over time, and yet for the families that quote unquote have made it, right? I made this air quote. They are one emergency away from going back to exactly where they were, that they have worked so hard to get out of. If there is any way that the city can loosen the compliance piece around, I know that Families Independence Initiative is working with DTA on flexible dollars for families to just be able to decide how they want to spend the money, for it to be utilities that they want to spend their assistance funds on, or food, and because month to month the needs change, and you can't just kind of dictate and go, well, this dollar can only be spent buying A, B, and C, and if you go out of line, you risk losing your assistance. That's not how life works. So I think as much flexibility that we can build in, that is the reality and that fits the reality of the people that we're working with, is something that if you can advocate for that would be a game changer. Thank you.
I think we're most effective when we work together. And this is an example. I think there are 3 recent examples of things that the city did that actually demonstrate how you can work together, which were beautiful, and I just want to highlight them. One is, Maria mentioned before, the project with the Safe and Successful Youth Initiative to try and understand what are the needs of high-risk young women. We don't often talk about this and the role of women in violence. They brought together, I think, more than 30 different professionals from different agencies, different organizations, speak together, analyze data, really identify the needs, and put together a really thoughtful report on this. And I think, and I hopefully will really impact what the state does on high-risk young women, and just really think it's a great example. The second thing is there's a new initiative that is a Canadian model, then was brought to Chelsea, and now spreads all around the state and the city, which is called the Hub and Core model, with the leadership of the Boston Police Department and the city. We're starting this in all around the city to see this, and I think this is a great way to bring different agencies, different people, different organizations around the need of specific people, not just to talk, but actually to do something together. And the last thing, which I think is, again, a great accomplishment that we just heard about a week ago, was there was a lot of collaboration between the different people who work in the SSYI network to advocate for more funds for intervention for the highest risk young people. Boston took a very strong leadership on this, and so have other cities. We all work together to advocate. And the governor just signed a budget that had the highest funding for SSYI since the program was established. At times it was $5 or $6 million a year. Now it's back at 10 where it started, which we think is phenomenal and allows for more services for this in the cities that are already being served, in other cities if they need to be added. And I just think it's good work that is being done, and just want to mention it for the record. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Garrison, any questions?
Okay.
Thank you, guys. I'll go to public testimony.
Yeah. So we're running against the clock here. So what we're going to do is, if you just respect the time as close as you can, and we'll try to fill as many people in as we can. We've talked about a lot of positive things. I will say before everybody leaves the room, tomorrow morning from 6 to like 10 o'clock in the morning at Almond Park, Channel 25 and Zip Trip will be there. So we got to talk about positive stuff, and they'll be there. So if you're in and around the area,
and if you don't know Mattapan, that's in Mattapan.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right down the street. So,
yeah. But thank you guys, and this is ongoing. We had many folks, other providers, also provide information and testimony. So thank you, and I can quickly go through. More folks who signed up for public testimony. Thomas, and I'll just call a few names, just come up. Thomas Apt, Chris White, I think it's Michelle Ferguson. And then I have, let's see, Makai and Jorge.
Real quick before folks go, I'm parked right over there by the dumpster truck. And I got 2 cars blocking me. I see a gold Honda and a silver.
One's me. I'll be going right after this.
Okay. So please go in the order in which I called. So Thomas Apt, then Chris White, and Michelle Ferguson. Councilor McCarthy is starting the clock.
All right.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Councilor Campbell, Councilor McCarthy, and the other members of the committee for holding this hearing. My name is Thomas Apt, and I work as a senior fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. Before Harvard, I served as the head of public safety for Governor Andrew Cuomo in New York, and before that, I served as chief of staff to the Office of Justice Programs under Attorney General Eric Holder and President Barack Obama. As a teacher, prosecutor, defense attorney, policymaker, and now researcher, I have worked on stopping the scourge of urban violence for more than 2 decades. I was born and raised just across the river in Cambridge, so what happens and continues to happen in Boston matters to me both personally and professionally. My time is limited, so I will come to the point. There is lots of good work being done in Boston to prevent shootings and killings, but that work could be better focused, supported, and coordinated. First, the good news. Since the 1990s, Boston has a national, even international, reputation in reducing urban violence. BBD has many strong ties to the community, and while nothing is perfect, the city has been spared much of the recent controversy surrounding police-community relations. The city has a number of high-quality violence intervention and prevention providers. At the state level, the Safe and Successful Youth Initiative has been rigorously evaluated and has been found to be effective. Now the less good news. Historically, the city has had difficulty sustaining success. When violence declines, interest and support fades, successful strategies are discarded, and then violence creeps back up. In Boston, as in many other cities, deadly violence is driven by, at most, a few hundred individuals in or around a few dozen micro-locations known as hotspots. Yet the city still struggles to maintain a laser-like focus on these people and places, targeting them not just for punishment, but also for treatment, support, and services. The city also struggles to unite under a common vision for violence reduction. Violence reduction is not just about reducing poverty or about reducing crime. Instead, it should be focused on one thing only: stopping the shootings and killings. Reducing violence is perhaps the single best way to release the untapped potential of Boston's poorest residents and communities. And so in conclusion, I have a book on these subjects, Bleeding Out: The Devastating Consequences of Urban Violence and a Bold New Plan for Peace in the Streets. I set out many of these themes and strategies, and I'd be happy to work with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. And I quickly want to acknowledge, and I apologize for not doing this sooner, but it will be on the recordings and everything else, that Devin from Rep. Holmes' office is here and has been here, as well as Chris Worrell from Senator Collins' office.
Hello, y'all. My name is Christian White. During the day, I'm a therapeutic mentor for JRI Smart Team, but 24/7, I'm a full-time single parent of a 12-year-old. I'm 40 years old. I've served 3 state sentences, 3 county sentences. When I was released this last and final time, I did 10 years for possession of a firearm, and I got out, and I was over the age of 25 or 26, which meant every program that you've spoken about today meant shit to me, my language. So we talk about these young people. They're, and I mean, I'm not one of these statistic geniuses or nothing, but, you know, a lot of the killings and a lot of the people being arrested for killings are 25 plus. And they receive no services. My son's at that age. Had I not turned my life around, he'd be following right in the path that I was led down. We talk about this wraparound approach, and it's wrap around these kids. We need to be wrapping around these parents. I don't care what you do to fix these kids, and you're not really even fixing these kids. You're kind of holding their hand and paying them and kind of calming them until you release them back into the wild. And when you release them right back into a home where the parents still thinking the same. So whose model's gonna end up winning? Your $1 million model or their everyday thinking that they're seeing from their parent? I'm gonna go with the parent, because that's what happened to me, and that's just my experience. So I mean, all this talk, I've heard the word youth over 100 times in a couple of hours. I haven't heard parent, grown folk, regular, good old adult one time. I haven't heard mental health but a couple of times. We talk about all these preventions, all these different ways of doing things. If you are not addressing these issues from multiple angles, especially the angle of the parents, you're just another Band-Aid. And that's any program you are.
That was solid.
Hi, everyone. First, thank you for having me here. I really appreciate the invite to this hearing. My name is Michelle Ferguson. I am a really good substitute teacher. I am also a business owner. I give a salute to people who are taking care of the 1%. Thank you for filling that void. I see it every day in the classrooms. I am very thankful that you were willing to share with us the 60 community organizations, because now we know where to send folk. But as a teacher, I definitely feel like we could be doing more to support businesses who are going to, even when I was working for another company before I started my own real estate company, I offered 4 internships. And those children were taking those internships. The reason why I offered 4 was because I originally only had 2. And there was such a strong demand for it that I increased it to 4. So I think until you start to approach this problem from multiple angles, one is supporting Black businesses, you can count on us to hire our own. And it's about hiring the men, because if a man can't provide for his family, there are going to be issues in that home. It's about taking care of the kids and creating opportunities where they can learn a trait and continue that trait. And it's also about us being able to actually support our own communities and strengthen our own communities. It's also about positive influence, because I sit outside, I get out of school the same time the kids do. I see how many negative influences there are, how the drug dealers are out, how the drug addicted are out, and there is a lack of positive influence on those kids' corners as they're going home from school. So it's just as important for our men and our women to be able to find jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I know we're running out of time, so I'll make it quick. My name's Makai. I'm 23 years old. I'm only a graduate of More Than Words, but now I am a full-time employee who was recently offered the position as a business training manager at More Than Words. It took me time to get to More Than Words. I was born in Roxbury, which is straight down the street. I grew up living with my mom and my dad, but we all know in the area, everybody's not only just inside, they're also outside, where you start to experience a lot of things like gun violence, substance abuse issues. I actually had substance abuse issues of my own, and every day going to school became less and less. I didn't really care about that. I was kind of consumed on being high, whether if that was out with my friends, at some of the older guys' houses, or even in school sometimes. So I had left school, I got my GED, and then through my GED program, I was referred to More Than Words. But before that, I was in holding cells and in prison at least 5 times before, because my mind off drugs is just not me. It's not me. I was just consumed in it. So I got to More Than Words. I started working there, and through the ranks, I started to love the program. And through loving that program and also meeting other youth who are younger or older than me who are also going through those issues, it made me stronger, because it made me feel like each and every day I can get up out the bed because I know there's somebody else going through it. I've heard their stories. So I'm like, it just made me stronger, and I fed on that. So it motivated me. I fell in love with the passion of the business, seeing not only myself go through the ranks and succeed, but the other youth that came along with me, or other youth that I seen come in or graduate before me. So I graduated More Than Words. One thing I've learned is that they always stick with you, no matter if you're still in the program or have graduated the program. And like I said, I'm just excited to be in this full-time salary position as a business training manager, and I'm excited for the opportunity, and I'm thankful for More Than Words, because it honestly, truly did change my life. Because parents don't always have the answer. Sometimes we don't want to hear our parents. We want to hear somebody else. Thank you.
Hi, how y'all doing?
Good to see you.
Yeah, my name is Jorge. I'm also representing More Than Words. I'm 18 years old, living in Dorchester. Before More Than Words, I was getting into a lot of trouble, doing things that were not benefiting me, hanging out with the wrong group of people and getting arrested. Ended up getting arrested a few times starting when I was 14. From there, I got in more and more trouble, making wrong decisions. I had been in DYS custody once and then put on probation. I was then referred to More Than Words by my lawyer when I was 17 to help keep me out of trouble and off probation quicker. It was a requirement for me to work and go to school. It was going well at More Than Words, but there was still a lot of drama in the community. It is cool at More Than Words, but the reality is that then when you leave, you have to go back to your neighborhood. And where I live in Dorchester, there's always a lot of shootings and a lot of gang activity going on. I've had some issues with other youth in the community, and I would consider myself like a lone wolf, since I'm usually always by myself, and where a lot of people that walk around in groups, they would consider that being vulnerable, which in the past has led to me being attacked and jumped before. I continued experiencing similar situations, and one day in September I blacked out and someone got assaulted and I unfortunately got arrested, that's where I take responsibility for my actions and making a bad choice. I was arrested for a felony. I was facing adult charges, but from the night of the incident, More Than Words was always there. John, my youth development manager at More Than Words, called me to walk me through turning myself in, and I knew I had a lot of support from him and More Than Words. They were there helping me, showing up at court every time, talking to my lawyer, visiting me in lockup, and making sure the DEA and judge knew about me from More Than Words' perspective. It helped a lot while I was in holding and helped open my eyes on how much I really had to lose. Here I was in lockup so that the community would be safer, but I got attacked and jumped and ended up getting my knee busted, where I had to go to the hospital for that. I was able to get out on a $10,000 bail on Christmas Eve and earn my spot back on More Than Words. Additionally, after making a lot of positive choices and on good behavior, the DA agreed to lower the most serious charge and tried me as an adult. My case has since been resolved, and I'm currently on probation. I've also graduated from More Than Words and working at Youth Build, and then currently trying to get my high set. More Than Words is also a caring business. It is not just a place that cares just about you finishing your work. They care about you, and they help you work on your life to better yourself as a whole. If you have issues that's going on in your life, that's definitely something that More Than Words does not let you deal with on your own. They support you through it all. Thank you for hearing my story. So youth are impacted by violence in so many ways. More Than Words can help make a difference, and I hope my story helps shows that. Thank you.
So I just want to acknowledge what we just heard. Those are two young people who are willing to come up and speak their narrative. And now you have to hear from me, and I'm going to have the boring information about More Than Words. So now, my name is Courtney, and I am representing More Than Words along with these two wonderful people. And we're a social enterprise. We believe that using a business to deliver on our mission empowers the most vulnerable young people in our area, 16 to 24-year-olds who are in the foster care system, they're court involved, they're homeless, they're out of school, but they're willing to take charge of their lives. In FY19, our government funding accounted for only 12% of our budget. Funding from the City of Boston included about $100,000 from WIOA and then the $25,000 from the Youth Development Fund, which we're very grateful for. This funding was allocated to support the enrollment of specific young people, and we use robust evaluation software, efforts outcomes, to track every aspect of their work and personal goals. Every dollar invested by the city, the state, and our private donors is leveraged in a big way. We empower our young people to take part of their own solution. They have skin in the game. They are generating over $3.5 million in our business. And that helps pay for their stipends and all of the programming. We have a 2-floor operation at 242 East Berkeley Street, where we serve 85 young people at any given time. We have 2 jobs for our young people, the business job and the U job. Youth are on the trucks. They're collecting over 4 million donated books per year. They're selling them on the business, the online sale, the retail sale, the wholesale, and pop-ups. This past year, we expanded from a 1st floor to a 2th floor, so we now have an event space and warehouse operation. Our youth learn to be professional. They learn about the business. They learn how to communicate. They learn to show up, be part of a team, and learn that they're worth something. Youth are also paid to invest on working on themselves. With dedicated youth development managers, like John that you heard before, youth work through research-based curriculum to tackle barriers. They make concrete plans for their own future, including education, work, and life. They're getting a bank account and ID. They're navigating housing, court issues, and they're pushing back on some of the systems that are pushing them back in. Very quickly, 78% of our youth had 30 hours of work, which means that 30 hours per week mean they're in school or working. 82% of our grads were holding the same job for 6 months. We believe this is what can be part of the solution, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, and I think I have, so if you're still here, Courtney Brown and Herb Lozano.
That's Courtney.
I'm sorry, Courtney. Madeline, who I think already testified, so I think we're all set.
All right.
So I'm going to quickly.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. Yep.
Tell me your name. Come on, Grace. You got 2 minutes. Come on. Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, guys. Oh, yeah, we're here. This bag.
Hi, my name is Grace Richardson, and I'm a resident here, born and raised. And I'd like to thank my city councilor, Andrea Campbell, and Jeff Ross for hosting this in our community of Mattapan. I just want to, I was born here and raised, and the city was quite different when I grew up. As a youth, from the time I was a child to I got 19 years old, a lot of this work that's being done now was done by residents in our neighborhood. I wanted to talk about just a little bit about the quality of life for Black families, and I agree with what the guy said, and a couple other people say that families need to be supported, not just youth, but also families as well. But I just want to say that the Black families, our Black community, we have a resilient community, and given a chance, given access to the city services, we can do a lot of this work in our community. Right now, we don't have access to a lot of the services in the cities. The Boston Globe did a couple years ago a research and report on racism in the city, and that has never been addressed. And so if we're talking about gun violence and these youth being impacted, a lot of the reasons why they're being impacted is because of these policies that are in place, where we have, another guy talked about, we have 9 neighborhoods in Boston, and we can go to those other neighborhoods and there's quality of life there, but in some neighborhoods there's not. There's a lack of quality of life. So I hear that beep on that thing, and I just want to say that we need to talk about that racism, and we need to talk about the policies and the structure in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I missed you. Hi.
Hello, everyone. My name is Catherine Jenkins Jom.
Sorry, Catherine, I missed you on the sheet. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. No worries. Yeah, so my name is Catherine Jenkins Jom. I lived in the Roxbury, Dorchester area for my whole adult life, where I've raised my 2 sons, one of whom was born here, and they came up through the Boston Public Schools. I want to call the names before I thank you all for organizing this. To who I'm thinking of today when we're talking about violence: Bettina Francois, Damien Debo Alston. I could call a lot of other names of people I either lost or loved ones of mine have lost. There's been a shooting on my street this year. This summer, this month. There's been a shooting at the park where my son always plays basketball and where my 2 kids used to always spend their time, across from the Kroc Center. And in some places in this country, the level of violence is so high that it's comparable to war zones in places where our government has waged war. What I want to talk about, and by the way, I've been an educator in public schools. I don't have a current assignment, but I've worked at the Mather, most recently as a sub and as a teacher of humanities at Boston Arts Academy. I've worked at the Mattapan Health Alliance. And I didn't even know about this meeting today. My friend Kiana Agbai, who's in Moms Demand Action, told me about it. I'm definitely not dressed for the occasion. But I think my t-shirt embodies a value that I try and instill in young people, which is remembering, going back. Sankofa, for those of you who know it, it means it's not bad to go back for what was taken from you or for what we've forgotten. It comes from the Akan people of Ghana. And what I hope to say in my little remaining time today, I want to be clear that this isn't like Catherine Jenkins Jom wisdom. This is what I've gathered from listening to a lot of people who don't look like me. Someone talked about the root causes of violence, and violence starts in the mind, in the body, and the spirit, and then spreads out into the family and the community, but it's a loop. It comes in from outside as well. And I think what I'm going to say now is just like going a level deeper from a lot of what's been said here. The root cause of violence in this society is our foundation, our foundation on slavery and colonialism. It's the fact that we have, as bell hooks would say, an imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy that we have never really addressed. It's the fact that the people who founded this nation and this government and these systems which we continue to enact were rapists and interacted with people every single day that they consider less than human, and that they thought that they owned, or that they did own. We need to address that. We need to address that, not just we need to address that in our schools if we want to do the healing that other people have talked about today. So, I mean, I don't think we can solve the problem of violence when all of our solutions are add-ons and wraparounds. We need to go to where our children are spending most of their time every single day, and we need to tell them the truth. We need to fund curriculums that speak that truth. We need to realize that doing school looks different than just reading and writing, which, by the way, are white supremacist values. There's other ways that we can communicate, like music and dance, which heal us and which historically all human people have had in their communities. So I will stop because I'm talking a lot, but we need to expand how we're thinking about it, and we need to specifically do a lot more funding of education, and we need to like radically rethink how we're doing education as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for all those who testified, and for those who did not get a chance to testify, and this, I'm also saying this for the record, please email us at the Boston City Council. If you just look online at bostoncitycouncil.gov, you will find every email, including mine, as well as the email for the Committee on Public Safety and Criminal Justice. It does get checked, so please do email us. We do respond, and thank you all for coming tonight.
So thank you very much for being here. I want to thank my fellow councilors, President Campbell and Councilor Althea Garrison. Councilor Garrison.
Once again, I would like to thank Chairperson Tim McCarthy of the Public Safety Committee for holding this hearing, and City Councilor President Andre Campbell for sponsoring docket number 0781. I'm committed to stopping the violence in Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, and the South End. Whether that means increasing the city budget for violence prevention or more jobs for youth, or programs for after-school programs for youth. And particularly, I think youth need more choices such as employment for at-risk youth and a job for those youths who want to work and earn money to help their family financially. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Garrison. That will conclude our hearing. This is docket number 0781. This is an order for a hearing to review all grants and city funds available for violence prevention and intervention purposes. This hearing is now adjourned.